Meantime, outside the Democratic National Convention, thousands of protesters and activists have descended on the streets of Philadelphia. That's where we find RT's Caleb Maupin standing by live among a crowd of protesters or demonstrators. Caleb?
Well, there's certainly no shortage of protesters here outside the Democratic National Convention. Throughout the first day, probably the most visible presence we've seen has been Bernie Sanders supporters who are outraged by the contents of the recently leaked emails. However, we've also spoken to some people that are here to support Hillary Clinton, and they don't seem to be quite as bothered. Let's take a listen to what we've heard here out on the streets of Philadelphia. So what was your first thoughts when you saw those emails?
Well, my first thought is that it's pretty obvious that the whole system is rigged. I mean, not just the DNC, but the entire electoral system of the country. It's rigged towards the wealthy and the powerful of the United States. It never was meant from the very beginning to work for the entire populace of the country or the world.
About the emails.
I think those were internal debates that should have stayed private. They weren't acted on. Just like Congress's emails do not get released, because if we saw their emails, you can imagine what some of those people may be saying about blacks, President Obama. It was an internal debate that was never acted on. I think Debbie, who I disagree with because she supported payday lender stuff, but I backed up off of that. But those were private emails. It was an internal debate. I think she should take a low role in the convention, but keep her job.
Now, just like the Republican convention last week, there is certainly no shortage of different protesters here. At this very moment, there's a protest for Puerto Rican independence taking place on the streets of Philadelphia. People calling for the release of Oscar Lopez, a Puerto Rican activist who remains in prison. There have been anti-abortion demonstrations by people who are calling for abortion to be outlawed. Many different causes are represented. We know that many people are anticipating a very large Black Lives Matter protest that is set to take place tomorrow in the streets of downtown Philadelphia. So while controversy continues inside the convention hall, the streets are anything but calm here in Philadelphia.
RT correspondent Caleb Maupin reporting live from Philadelphia. Thank you.